Hi, I'm Ghost. I'm your host. And, it's about to be the end of the year. So, I thought I'd say goodbye to 2024 with a nice discussion of horrible, horrible violence and brutality. Because, what else are you guys here for? Let's be honest. So, here we go, gang. Let's talk about the top 10 most brutal moments in horror history. A few disclaimers before we begin. One, only one moment per series. Otherwise, I'd be like, this moment from August Underground, and this moment from August Underground, and this Lucifer Valentine moment, and this Lucifer Valentine moment, and then this moment from August. You get the point. One per series. Next is no shockumentaries or scenes of just actual violence. So, while they're definitely brutal and dark moments, you're not going to be hearing anything from traces of death or faces of gore or anything like that. Third, this is not a list of the most disturbing moments in horror, it's just some of the most brutal. So where, just for example, a lot of vomit gore movies have a lot of really disgusting, nasty moments that will make you uncomfortable. They're not necessarily consistently brutal, just gross. That type of thing won't make it here. It's brutal, unforgiving moments, not just gross ones. And lastly, this is not a definitive list. I've not seen every horror movie ever created, nor am I entirely static in my opinions. You could catch me on a different day and maybe I'd feel entirely differently about this. This is just how I feel in the moment, based off of what I've seen personally. Alright, without further ado, sorry for all the bullshit, let's just get into the video. Coming in at number 10 is Daisuke Yamanouchi's, 1999 film, Red Room, with the scene... Oh god. Oh no, not that. Light bulb pussy fucking. Yeah, so basically, earlier on in the film, this chick gets a light bulb in the puss. And there's some blood, and it's nasty, and it stays there. All the broken glass, it's up in there. It's not a pleasant thought. Anyway, the movie ends with this guy being like, no, I respect you. I'm gonna put myself through this. And then just fucking the light bulb bit-filled pussy. It's gnarly. It does not look pleasant. It's brutal. It's so creative and bizarre. Who the fuck would have thought of that? I wouldn't have, and I love thinking of some brutal shit, but who the fuck thinks? What would happen if a guy says, what if I fucked you and you had a bunch of light bulb bits down there? And the fact that he fully volunteers for it just makes it all the more concerning. But it also makes it not super high. Quite plainly, it's not too graphic in comparison to a lot of the others on this. And also, it's far enough removed from reality, because I highly doubt that this is a common occurrence, that I can't necessarily say that it is really and truly one of the most brutal moments. But it's certainly an unforgiving one. The other thing that bumps it down to number 10, though, is the fact that they do volunteer to do it. Like, they fully decide to fuck the light bulb puss. So, I mean, it's your own fucking fault at that point, man. But it's definitely brutal, especially if you're a dude and you're like, oh no, that's not okay. So anyway, yeah. Number 9. Coming in at number 9 is a scene from my favorite horror film of all time, actually. The horror, action, comedy, drama, crime flick, Ichi the Killer, with the torture scene of Suzuki. Now, a lot of scenes in Ichi the Killer could absolutely fit the bill for this video. I mean, quite plainly, it's got some of the most depraved, insane, unhinged violence imaginable. And there's always an excessive amount of screaming and blood and guts to go with it. That being said, I actually think that the rather restrained Suzuki torture scene is the most brutal in Ichi the Killer. That's because it's a long scene, with this man suspended with hooks in his flesh, getting his mouth stabbed with a big, thick, almost sewing needle-like thing, and having boiling grease, like boiling oil made to make tempura, poured onto him. And the most insane part is that at the end, it ends up being it was all a misunderstanding that led Kakihara, our protagonist, to torture Suzuki, the victim, And it's treated so nonchalantly, because Kakihara is just like, ah, shit, my bad, sorry, anyway, bye now. And the nonchalant reaction to the knowledge that this was all just a mistake is just, it really adds to how vicious and unforgiving the scene is. Watching this man as he's screaming in horrible, horrible pain, ordinarily quite macho, now whimpering like a little fucking pussy as he's being viciously tortured. It's definitely gonna stay in your head for quite some time afterward, for better or for worse. I think it's a really, really well-crafted scene. I think it's really gnarly, and it's very fucking brutal, deserving its number 9 spot. Next up is the big scene from Mei-chan's daily life. Now, quite plainly, we're officially at the point where I don't know how much I can show you without immediately getting age restricted. So I'm gonna be a little lenient here, but you're gonna get the idea, because I'm gonna show you enough that you get the fucking idea. Basically, in Mei-chan's daily life, there's a character that can, you know, infinitely heal and not die, and there's a bunch of freaky sex stuff, a lot of sadism, and they're horribly cut open and used for just terrible, terrible, bloody, vicious, violent things, all for the sexual pleasure of the master of the residents. It's very gnarly and very unforgiving, and, you know, there's some chainsaw gut fucking, you know, there's everything here. Pretty much most types of over-the-top depravity you can think of is present. It's a depraved, mean-spirited, and just nasty scene, which feels no mercy for the viewer watching it. If anything, it kind of crosses its fingers that the viewer is getting some type of demented pleasure out of it as well. And for that, I think that it's really brutal. Now, the way I'm describing it, I'm sure that you think that this should be a higher placement. But there are two things keeping me from placing it higher. One is just how over-the-top and insane this is. It goes slightly too far for it to be truly believably vicious. You see, brutality can be defined as just the most suffering, in which case this list could be quite different. But for me, brutality is a mix of the most suffering and how much it can impact the viewer and the intentions behind the scene. I believe that the impact it may have on the viewer is not quite as heavy as I believe that. Again, I think that it's kind of hoping that the viewer gets a pleasure out of it as well. Meanwhile, you'll see later on in the list that some of these scenes feel like they genuinely exist just to make the viewer cry at night. There's a hate behind some of these scenes that is absolutely not present here. The other thing that's keeping me from placing this higher is, quite plainly, some of these are just way gnarlier than this one. And we're gonna get there. So, buckle up, because we're officially just going down into the depths of this bullshit. Hey, you like your family? You like kids? Not like that, ditty-ass motherfucker. Well, Untold Story would not be the movie for you if you are a family individual, because, you know, there's a pretty vicious scene here. Watch as our protagonist horribly slaughters an entire family over not being paid what he's owed from gambling, even though he cheats, so he really isn't owed that money. But, you know, he's pissed off. You know, he's tired of it. He's not gonna take it anymore. So, what do? You fucking decapitate some kids. Kill some kids in front of the parents, kill some parents in front of the kids, beat up some of the kids, tie them up, gag them. Do everything you can to cause the maximum amount of suffering you possibly can. It's mean, it's angry, and it damn well does not want you to come out of that scene happy. Which is funny, because, fun fact, The Untold Story is actually a horror comedy. There is not much funny about this scene. It's just a purely violent, mean-spirited scene that exists to simply rot in your mind. And for that, it's respectable. The absolute entire dismantling of a family with nothing but pure hate and pettiness behind it, that is pretty fucking vicious. And let me tell you, it doesn't really skimp out. You're gonna see some crazy fucking violence commit to these people, despite the fact that they are mostly children. The Untold Stories child murder, family massacre scene certainly deserves its placement on this list. Knocking out the other family massacre, let's talk about Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, my second favorite horror movie of all time. One of the most real and nihilistic horror films of all time. Mostly because it's based off a true story. But the scene I'm actually going to discuss here involves the protagonists, Henry and Otis, two very, very, very depraved individuals, breaking into the home of a family, violating the mother, and killing all of them. And the reason that I'm putting this above The Untold Story, despite the fact that it is shorter and less graphic, is simple. This one's a lot more real. And this one's a lot more hopeless. See, with Untold Story, it's told in a flashback, so sure, you know how it ends. But it's all much more movie-like. It's done to some ridiculous levels. And it just doesn't feel as mean. This scene in Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, it feels like it wants to create a great big fucking hole in your stomach and make your heart sink as you watch as this family is absolutely mercilessly tortured and abused and killed. And there is no hope. It's a hollow, unfortunate scene, and that's why I put it above Untold Story. Next is the ending of Perfect Child of Satan, one of Lucifer Valentine's vomit gore adjacent films. So a lot of people refer to the Vomit Gore series as a trilogy. A, you're fucking wrong. B, I go as far as to say it's actually just like a pretty large series, because anything with that style movie poster usually is pretty firmly related. The Perfect Child of Satan is the least related, which is why I call it Vomit Gore adjacent. But, you see the similarities. You see, the thing is, earlier on, when I was introducing some of the rules for this video, I used the Vomit Gore series as an example of it's mostly gross, not brutal. This scene is brutal. So, essentially, Perfect Child of Satan is a Lucifer Valentine short film where a good chunk of it is serving as just an introduction to the character. You get to know them, and you get to empathize with them. And they're excited to go out on a date, and they're very happy, and he seems so nice online. And the story does not end well, as you can imagine, as it is a Lucifer Valentine creation. Our protagonist goes to meet with him, and is pretty much immediately met with a violent end. There's no forgiveness in the heart of this killer. There is no mercy. You watch as they're just relentlessly brutalized. It's an angry, hateful scene that also serves as a warning against doing this type of shit through the internet and just being like, let's meet up. Which, thank you, Lucy Val. Look at that. You can teach us a good lesson. Hey, let's see what you teach us in your other films. Oh, it's okay to do horrible things to women? I don't agree with that one. Mr. Valentine, you might need to get your morals fixed a little bit, but good to see a good message in one creation of yours. Yeah, Perfect Child of Satan is a really, really weird film, and the actual killing that I'm referring to is done through some quite bizarre visuals. But it's certainly a haunting scene. It's certainly an angry scene. And the merciless, torturous killing of our protagonist after spending all this time building them up as a character and getting us to know them is what makes me say that this is very deserving of its spot on the list. So, I don't think I've talked about this movie before pretty consciously, because talking about this movie on YouTube is pretty much a death sentence, but I'm gonna talk about it here anyway, which is, yes, I've seen a Serbian film because it is the most famous piece of extreme cinema. I consider the Mount Rushmore of, like, underground horror cinema to be the August Underground series, a Serbian film, Salo, and Cannibal Holocaust. You could swap August Underground for Martyrs, but that's not important right now. Of course, a lot of people have seen a Serbian film, and what makes it stand out in the scene is how well-funded and just generally well put together it is. Most underground horror is done on low budgets from small, passionate teams of horror-loving people. This was a lot bigger of a project, and it was made in protest of some new censorship stuff going on in Serbia. But personally, a Serbian film really isn't as bad as the reputation makes it seem. Anytime someone says the most disturbing movie of all time is a Serbian film, you know they have not been in the actual horror underground, and they basically just heard about it on TikTok and instantly went, "That's nasty!" While certainly in concept one of the most, in execution, it's relatively restrained compared to what you hear.
Novi Sad! Newborn!
That being said, the entire ending is absolutely insane. The thing with a Serbian film is you really are just watching a constant downward spiral. It just is non-stop getting worse for our protagonist. It is not pleasant. And once you're at the bottom, well, you're very much at the bottom. Fucks his kid, and fucking snaps. There's some skull fucking, there's a lot of murder, some dick biting, pretty much everything that you can imagine, in terms of violence on a porn set. And ultimately it ends with them having their own suicide filmed, as the family is now in shambles, having gone through all of this horrible, horrible, horrible trauma. And then his brother ends up dead, and yeah, no, it's not a nice happy old film. It's mean, and it's angry, and it's depressing. And that ending, from what you've heard, I'm not spicing it up like the TikTokers or anything. I'm telling you how it is. It's bad. As a whole, a Serbian film is certainly not the most disturbing film of all time. Even if you cut out, like, shockumentaries and mixtapes and stuff, it's still not. But the ending is definitely one of the most disturbing moments in all of horror, because, oh man, is it just fucking wild and unforgiving as hell. It knows that the viewer wants to die during that scene, and it fucking revels in it. Next isn't really all that interesting in comparison to a lot of these scenes. It's also the only one that I'm pretty sure I can show you literally none of. But I'm gonna do my best to respectfully describe it. Scrapbook, shockingly enough, is one of the more, morally sound pieces of extreme cinema, because it genuinely does have good intention behind it. That being said, most people aren't gonna see that, because there's a pretty thick layer of sexual violence covering that up. And as you can imagine, that's what I'm gonna talk about. There's a lot of mean, unforgiving scenes in this film, but pretty early on, there's a really nasty sexual assault scene that I'm not going to describe in too much detail, because I really don't want to be age-restricted. But there's some blood and a lot of screaming, and I'll play a very, very brief audio clip now. It's very, very real feeling, and nasty, and really hard to sit through. I didn't rewatch every film for this video, but I rewatched every scene. Like, I scrolled through the films picking scenes, and I made a list of a bunch of movies I thought I could talk about. This one was, like, shocking even the second time around, which does not usually happen. It's really fucking mean and nasty. And Scrapbook's a pretty good movie, but it is really hard to get through some of those scenes, especially for the average viewer. I will tell you, a lot of these movies are pretty gnarly. For the most part, they are not like the deepest of the horror underground, but they have some of the most extreme scenes, or most brutal scenes. And you could probably enter the underground with a lot of these films, like Ichi or Mei-chan. They're relatively forgiving to newcomers to the underground horror scene. Not that all of them are, but I will tell you very much that Scrapbook is one of the least friendly to newcomers. If you're trying to get into the underground and you're watching my channel and other channels to just learn about some of the movies, I'm just going to be friendly and tell you, avoid this one until you're deep in. Either that, or if nothing's impacting you, then you're probably fine. But this one is a rough, sexually aggressive watch. Next is from a, half porn. It's another one that's about porn. This is Tumbling Doll of Flesh, and this is my longest scene, so I wasn't really sure if I wasn't sure if I could put this on this list because it's, very, very long. It's, a good portion of the movie, but it's one continuous moment, for, 25 to 30 minutes or something. I thought I'd talk about it anyway, just because, goddamn. Basically, Tumbling Doll of Flesh follows a crew making a kinky porn. She's not able to do a lot of the stuff. She's just plainly not comfortable with it. They're angry with her, and it ends up escalating to the point that they, knock her unconscious, and it becomes a horrible violation and mutilation. It's nasty. That entire scene, the mutilating and violating, that's what's here. They're filming them cutting off limbs, biting out their tongue, cutting them up, stabbing them, R-wording them. I really don't know what I can say on YouTube, so it might be a little inconsistent throughout the video. I've been age-restricted before. I don't want to be age-restricted again. Super, super nasty. It's just a non-stop barrage of horrible, horrible torture, and the fact that she survives such an unbelievable amount makes it really fucking unhinged and wild to watch. It's really not a pleasant movie. It's not a good movie either. Remember how I was telling you with Scrapbook, it's not very friendly to newcomers, but it's a pretty good movie? This one's not friendly to newcomers, and the movie's total dog shit. Don't watch it. Really quickly, before we get to the number one decision, I'm gonna pull a watch mojo here and give you a few really brief honorable mentions. The first is, I'm not a Terrifier channel. I know I've talked about it a pretty decent amount since Terrifier 3 dropped, but yeah, the Terrifier 2 Salt Kill, if you know, you know, is very, very brutal. Art the Clown dismembers a young lady, and they pour bleach all over her after she's all torn up and somehow still holding on to life. It's ridiculous, the fact that she survives, all of this. Didn't quite make the list just because it's a pretty highly produced, removed from reality kill. It's nasty, but in the end, it is a slasher kill. Next is just a quick scene from another movie. I've talked about a handful of these movies on my channel before. Murder Collection is one of them. There's one scene in Murder Collection that's a pretty nasty scene involving a kidnapping and murdering of a couple people that seem to be in a relationship. That's my guess, at least, just the way that they act. It's just a pretty heartless, sad scene, and if you've seen, some real footage of this type of thing before, you'll realize that it's not too far removed, even though it is fake. Didn't quite make the list because it's pretty short and not particularly, graphic, but it definitely deserves a mention. And lastly, of the honorable mentions, I wanted to mention the piercing scene from Splatter Naked Blood, which is just a lot of piercing being done to yourself by yourself, and it's out of like a horrible masochistic pleasure, and I really have to dance around this one because talking about this topic is what's gotten me age restricted before, but it's not very professionally done piercings, and it does not look nice. Just wanted to quickly mention those because they were certainly ones that popped into my head. Let's talk about number 1. I finally get to talk about August Underground again. Interviewed the creator a while back, did a video on all the movies. Kind of a rough video. Still really happy with the interview. Fred Vogel's a very nice guy. So basically, there's a version of the second film in the August Underground trilogy called The Maggot Cut. The guy who played Maggot basically made his own version. It was released without Vogel's permission.
I came back, Jeremy and Christy were both like, hey, Maggot's been re-editing the movie. We really don't know how we feel about it. He's kind of taking, your character out of the movie. The release that Toe Tag put out is the movie. The movie was made by Toe Tag. All the Maggot Cut is just an edit from Maggot. And, he shouldn't have been selling it back in the day.
Now that you have a little bit of a background, there's one scene in the standard August Underground film in which a dead child has things happen to them involving... Whatever, I'll just cut the shit. A dead child is defiled in a bathtub, and there are maggots nearby, and it's mean, and it's nasty, and it's really, really the only... I've been able to go through all these scenes when I first watched the films, and basically maybe at most be like, oh goddamn, and feel a little stressed out or something. This is the only scene that ever properly disturbed me. Admittedly, it was much more impactful when I first saw it, but I think it's more so just because once you've seen something as absolutely vile as that scene, it really does make pretty much everything else seem pretty lame. You're past the point of no return at this point, man. The August Underground movies were some of my earliest experiences with extreme cinema. Don't do that. A really weird way to enter the scene. Very, very emotionally heavy and just fucking filthy. The Maggot Cut is not a particularly good film, but this scene is easily one of, if not the most depraved, disgusting, brutal moments in all of horror. It's emotionally fucking heavy, and it makes me uneasy even just talking about it. So yeah, that's my list. I hope you enjoyed. If you're planning on making an angry comment or something, I said I have not seen every horror film ever made, and it could depend on the day what ends up on this list. I mean, you can see that my number 10 and my honorable mentions are quite mild in comparison to the higher up ones on this list. Those are perfectly able to change depending on the day. That being said, I thank you for getting this far in the video. I hope I was respectful of all these topics. And I do want to say this just because I feel like a lot of people watch my channel for the same reason that they watch something like Scare Theater or the disturbing movie Iceberg, which is they want to learn about all this fucked up stuff so that they can watch it and say hey, look at how crazy I can go or something. You don't have to feel pressured to go into the horror underground if you don't wanna. You should be perfectly comfortable staying in the surface level of horror, because it's not for everybody. So, while I'm very happy that you've watched my video, if you don't think that you can make it through a lot of these films, just don't watch them. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a perfectly respectable thing to do. Remember, look out for yourselves. I'm wishing you all a good new year. I hope you enjoyed my video. I hope you enjoy my channel. Thank you again for 1,000 subscribers. I said that last video, but really, thank you. And this is Ghost signing off.